So Canon dominates the headlines right now, and Sony has been setting the pace. But today, Nikon, Sigma, Laowa, and maybe even DJI are making headlines that matter. From a new ZF Silver option to a serious pause from Nikon and a flood of fast glass. We've also got some serious rumors about upcoming Sony bodies. There's a lot to cover, so let's jump in. So if you've been waiting for a clean, classic silver ZF to pair with your primes, then this one is pretty straightforward. According to Nikon Rumors, the new ZF Silver model is now available for pre-order with the specialized colors currently limited to direct orders from Nikon. Shipping is set to start on September 26th. So if you're after that unique finish, plan on going through Nikon's online store for the moment, as third-party availability hasn't been a part of this initial phase. But let's make it short and sweet. If the silver finish is on your short list, then the order window is open and shipping timelines are clear. But next, and speaking of Nikon, they've got a more complex update that is tied to image authenticity that every shooter should understand. Because this is the kind of issue that goes beyond just features. This touches on the trust of our images. According to Petapixel, Nikon has suspended its Nikon Authenticity service, which we just talked about last week, after confirming an issue with the Nikon Z6 Mark III's C2PA functionality. The problem centers on multiple exposure mode, where it's possible to combine C2PA signed and unsigned photos into a single image that still receives the authenticated signature. Photographer Adam Horschak demonstrated that with firmware 2, and a Z6 III could sign a photo that mostly consisted of an image from a second Z6 III without C2PA enabled, meaning that the C2PA enabled camera didn't contribute meaningfully to the image content. Yet the final file was verified and authenticated. This loophole raises the possibility of images, including AI-generated ones, captured on non-authenticated cameras being wrapped into a signed file and passing the verification. Nikon acknowledged the issue in a notice published on September 5th, apologized for the inconvenience, and said it has temporarily suspended the service while working on a fix. Potential remedies could include locking down multiple exposure or preventing images from that mode from being signed at all. But for now, the key takeaway is that Nikon moved quickly to suspend the service after this issue was found, and says that an update will follow once corrective measures are complete. So if you rely on content credentials in your workflow, keep an eye on Nikon's next firmware or service bulletin. I'll update you as soon as a fix is announced. Now moving from authentication over to optics, Sigma has both long-term designs and short-term announcements in the pipeline. And they might be laying the groundwork for some of their most interesting fast primes yet. And it looks like we might actually see some of them pretty imminently. According to the photoblogger, Sigma published a new patent in August that details 6 prime lenses designed across 35, 50, and 85mm focal lengths at f1.2 and 1.4. The application outlines an approach balancing compact size, reduced weight, and high optical performance using using a floating focus mechanism and aspherical elements aimed at correcting distortion and focus breathing, especially relevant for video. The examples included a 50mm f1.2, an 85mm f1.2, a 35mm f1.2, as well as additional designs for a 50 and an 85 at 1.4. Now this patent sits alongside Sigma's existing f1.2 mirrorless offerings, the 35-1.2 ART DG-DN and the 50mm f1.2 ART, but with an eye towards addressing size, weight, and focus behavior that matter for high-resolution sensors, and especially video work. Meanwhile, images and specs have leaked for 3 lenses slated for announcement on September 9th. A 135 f1.4 full-frame autofocus lens with a 105mm filter thread. We talked about this earlier in the week. This thing is going to be gigantic, which is why it has a tripod collar, and it's going to be 1.3 kilograms. At that same announcement, we're also expecting their 200mm, their 20 to 200mm f3.5-6.3, and a 35-1.2 Mark II that's about 25% shorter and lighter than its predecessor, likely a part of this packet of lenses in the patent. Now, all 3 of those listed lenses are for Sony E and Leica L mount. Pre-orders are expected to open on the day of the announcement. A little bit more info coming soon about the L mount itself. This patent suggests that Sigma's prime roadmap is continuously moving forward, and that on September 9th, we're going to be seeing a whole bunch of new lenses from Sigma. It really is a really exciting time right now for lens enthusiasts. Like if you're just interested in fast, interesting glass from these third-party manufacturers, it's just a super fun time to be watching this space, unless of course you shoot Canon RF. Speaking of fun and exciting lenses, another update that we're watching closely is Laowa's multi-lens showcase, headlined by a fast telephoto that's been rumored for years. Now, according to Digital Camera World, Venus Optics, which is the company behind the Laowa brand, is prepping a major September unveiling, potentially at IBC, with 6 new lenses. The standout being the 200mm f2, reportedly weighing just 1.6 kilograms, which is over a kilo lighter. That's more than a kilo lighter and 5 centimeters shorter than the Nikon F-mount equivalent, while offering the same aperture and focal range. And early details point to this being available on Canon EF, which has made it really interesting, Nikon Z, Sony E, as well as the potential for a GFX version down the road. The lens is said to offer switchable aperture operation between stepped and stepless for stills or video, and will come in gray and blue finishes. Availability anticipated after China's National Day in early October. And beyond the headliner, their Sea Dreamer lens, they're also preparing full frame tilt shift 35mm f2.8, as well as a 17mm f4. There's also the potential for an autofocus full frame 180mm f4.5. That's a macro, also available on EF, RF, E, Z, and L mounts. And for filmmakers, 2 full frame anamorphic zooms, the Sunlight 40-80, that's a T4.5 2x anamorphic, and the Sunlight 70-135, also T4.5, also 2x anamorphic. The sunlight indication is traditionally regarding the color of the flaring. Anamorphic lenses can come with a couple of different options here, normally in the sunlighter white and blue. But sticking with primes, I want to transition quickly to some news for shooters who are seeking budget-friendly, fast 50mm. And that's coming from a name that I've talked about here on the channel before, which is Brightin Star. An accessible 50mm can be an absolute workhorse. In my video where I talked about how to get started into photography and what kinds of gear you should be getting, especially if you're doing portraits or families or even weddings in some cases, the 50mm at a fast aperture like 1.8, 1.4, 1.2, that's the direction that you want to go to get started. It's going to be the best lens to start with and learn as a photographer. The lens emphasizes the large 1.4 aperture for shallow depth of field and improved low light performance. I recently reviewed the Brightin Star 50mm f.95, their super bokeh master, and I was very, very impressed both with its handling, image quality, and honestly, it was just a fun lens to play with. Now this lens, the optical construction is listed as having 5 groups with 6 elements, including 1 ED and 1 HD element, plus coatings aimed at controlling flare, ghosting, and purple fringing. It also features a high precision aperture mechanism designed for continuous, smooth adjustment to avoid abrupt exposure changes. This is going to be great for folks using a lens like this for video. It's got a minimum focusing distance of 42 centimeters, which again, at 50mm is going to be great for things like portraits and still life work. On paper, this is a straightforward, value-focused option for folks looking for a fast 50. But let's zoom out really quick and take a look at the market in general before circling back to the big rumor that keeps resurfacing. An industry snapshot is telling us who's gaining ground and who's playing catch-up. And according to A7V Rumors, shipment data from 2021 to 2024 indicates that OM System and Panasonic are trailing behind the big manufacturers in mirrorless camera shipments. It's a headline level view, but it reinforces where the market momentum has been concentrated in recent years. Additional details that I've seen are that in 2024, Canon took the top spot, and one very interesting thing to note is that Canon actually sold more DSLR cameras than Fujifilm sold cameras. So as we talk about the market and the influence that some of these other brands have on the market and the direction that some of the big players are going, keep in mind that in some cases, the online social media echo chamber can not necessarily reflect reality, as it's felt for a while like everybody was switching over to Fuji. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Everybody's buying cheap Canons, and everybody who cares is buying Sony. Next, let's talk about this rumor that just won't die. And I've made 3 videos about it in the last 2 weeks, I think, because the volume of things that we're hearing continued to go up and up. DJI has been long rumored to get into the mirrorless game. And I think at this point, the story is getting as close to reality as possible before an actual announcement. And according to Digital Camera World, they have multiple reports that are suggesting that DJI might actually be announcing their first frame mirrorless camera on September 15th. The 9th and the 15th continue to be, in tech, probably some of the most exciting days on the calendar, even if nothing happens. Just looking at it right now. Couple days in advance. The 9th and the 15th are going to be insane. But the other bit of news is that DJI might also potentially be adopting the L mount. The rumored body that we're potentially going to expect to see in rumors is going to be a boxy cinema-style camera evoking the Sony FX3 with an integrated electronic viewfinder, and that they'd be borrowing the color science and user interface that's been influenced by Hasselblad. My hope is that they'll actually take the Hasselblad name and not the DJI name so that we can actually see this thing in the United States. We've got some blurred images and the potential imminent teaser from DJI on the 15th. And additional evidence compiled by L-Mount Rumor Watchers included a briefly posted influencer teaser for the September 15th event and a YouTube video of a blurred cinema camera where Viltrox PL to L adapter is clearly visible. This suggests a compact L-mount cine camera that isn't yet public. And the rumored specs coalesce around a full-frame, cine-focused L-mount camera with integrated viewfinder. And the other rumor that I've been hearing is that it would potentially bring LiDAR autofocusing like the Ronin system, and that it may in fact actually bring the Ronin style sensor that we get to this camera. So I'll be honest, if DJI steps into the L-mount, bringing lens compatibility that's already available from Leica, Panasonic, and Sigma, that is in my mind there's an earthquake in the market. But let me know what you think down below. But to close, our final story is a quick word from Sony Rumors, and the emphasis here is on the word rumors, because sometimes the most responsible update is just a caution sign. According to Sony Alpha Rumors, there's a wild rumor roundup floating out there that an A7V and an FX8 are in the wild. And if you watch Sony Alpha Rumors and the way that he actually communicates with potential leakers is that person submits an anonymous tip via their kind of tip email form system. And then if they don't have, an ability to communicate back, he'll just post on Sony Alpha Rumors. And I've been watching this back and forth over the last 3 or 4 days, and it sounds like they're getting closer to validating at least that this person might be the real deal. And Sony Alpha Rumors has shared these details primarily so that people can kind of track whether or not any of these claims later prove to be accurate. So we have no concrete specifications that have accompanied the roundup other than the fact that it's out there. But the 2 bits of news that I would share with you is, number 1, that the FX8 is apparently confirmed and that rental houses have started talking about it. Now, at this level, these types of cinema cameras traditionally aren't 100% purchased. You get to a point where in some cases, these types of cameras are more often rented for long periods of time for shoots and productions than they are purchased by production houses or by teams. So unlike a camera like the A7V where, people are just gonna buy it and they're gonna own it and it's gonna stay with them, and yeah, you're gonna be able to rent it from your local camera shop or from lensrentals.com or wherever, and you're gonna be able to rent it from your local camera shop and lensrentals.com and all that sort of thing. But really, these higher end cameras, these cinema cameras, are more closely kept in these rental houses. And so the fact that rental houses are talking about getting this new camera, that feels real. And that doesn't really tell us anything about the camera other than the fact that it's coming, potentially, maybe, yes? But the other bit of information on the A7V that Sony Alpha Rumors shared is the fact that exclusivity on the sensor that we have in the Z9 and the Z8 is expiring soon. So if you didn't know, Sony as a camera manufacturer kind of makes their own sensors. Sony is a large company with a lot of different parts. There's not really like a US equivalent. But think about something like Samsung, where there's a lot of products that say Samsung and they're made by Samsung, but the folks who are making the washers and dryers aren't necessarily talking to the guys who are making the cell phones. And so while Sony cameras use Sony sensors, the Sony imaging team sells those sensors to lots of people. They sell them to Nikon, they sell them to DJI, they sell them to Apple, they sell them to a lot of people. And Sony and Samsung are 2 significant producers of sensors all over the world. But at the higher end, when you talk about full-frame cameras, Sony is making more sensors than really anybody except maybe Canon. Now, Canon doesn't sell their sensors really to a lot of other people except in their industrial divisions. But Sony does sell their stuff to Nikon specifically. And it looks like, at least according to this rumor, there's exclusivity on the Sony sensor that's in the Nikon Z8 and Z9. And the details on that particular sensor are that it's a 45 megapixel backside illuminated CMOS sensor without an AA filter. That keeps it sharper. It's also a stacked sensor, which allows for faster burst shooting and better readout speeds for things like video. And in Nikon's cameras, it was paired with the X-Speed 7 processor. But in a Sony camera, they would obviously be able to pair it with their really top of the line AI chips for things like low light performance and improvement, as well as autofocus speed and lock-on performance. Not to mention the fact that Sony could pair it with their exceptional image stabilization system. And remember, this sensor is able to deliver 120 frames per second at reduced resolution and blackout-free shooting in the Z8 and the Z9. And in the Nikon version, it can shoot 8K 60 frame per second RAW. It's also not paired with a mechanical shutter. And the rumor indicates that this would be an improved version of that sensor, as that sensor is now a few years old, in addition to bringing Sony's AI features. And the rumor specifically mentions 4K 60 oversampled from the 8K signal. When we have more credible information or leaked details or anything official from Sony, I'll make sure to cover it here. But that's it for our camera news that I'm gonna cover in this video. If you wanna support what I'm doing here, consider becoming a channel member. It's $1. And if you're looking to book a photo or video session, all the details are down below, including links to some of the gear that I talked about in the video, as well as my other gear lists. And those lists do help the channel, but if you want to support what I'm doing here, the easiest way is just to hit like and subscribe. Those are always free, and they go a long way to helping me grow here on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.